Right. So the United States um, has created an industry of mass incarceration. Right. The prison industrial complex. Um, we have a talent for turning anything into a commodity, right? And prison is no different, right? Incarceration. Presently, there's an estimated 2 million people that are locked up in the United States, and that's including, uh, but not limited to, state prisons, federal prisons, local jails, detention centers for immigration, and so on. Um, so this creates there's a lot of people on hold, right? But the turnaround is, the majority of those people aren't going to be in prison forever. Right? They do have an estimated release date, and they do have the right to have served time for their crime and return and be reintegrated in society, right? So presently, that's about 10,000 people a week, okay, or 650,000 ish, 600,000 a year, right? Somewhere in that range, ridiculous amounts of people, right? And presently, there's this movement on reentry, right? So, uh, you know, how do we treat these people, or how do we best serve the formerly incarcerated population, right? I am a formerly incarcerated person, so this kind of is, as a personal intention for me, okay? So the many barriers that I have experienced, right, and a lot of them are internalized, right, just because of the way society is, right, and how our system perceives us. So the population I would like to work with, right, is not so much reentry, right, as far as the people returning into the community, but the population, I think there's a lot of movement around that, right? How do we best serve people rejoining our society? But I think there's an important piece that is missing, right? So the professional aspect, right? How do we encourage the people that work within the correction system and are contracted by, right, or just employed to serve the population that the correction system serves? How do we properly educate them and access them to the resources they need to better serve the population that they are dealing with, right? So, unfortunately, there's a huge stigma in our society that states that once a convict, always a convict, right? And that is a stern belief, right? I mean, that is like ingrained, right? There should be no forgiveness, and that's counterintuitive to the system we have set up, right? We say you should pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? So, I mean, that statement kind of denies that ideal. How do we change that? Well, and if you look over the statistics, right, there are some 300 to 400,000 people that are directly corrections officers, right, within our country. That's in all levels of jails, right? And they don't really require much more than a high school diploma or equivalent to be qualified for this job, right? So, how does high school or a GED prepare them to deal with the social deficits and try and bring a strength-based perspective to the community they're working with, right? So, that's just corrections officers themselves, right? I'm not talking about all these industries or systems within our community that also try and serve the reentry population. We'll talk about education, right? Like, so I mean, I got ahead of myself, right? So, if you only required a high school equivalent to be a corrections facility, right, officer, I think you need some extra training, right? And that's the population I seek to serve, right? Maybe some kind of curriculum that would help them understand more of this, I guess, the social implications that have driven this population to now be in custody. Understanding, the disparages that the communities that are overrepresented in the industrial prison complex might create a larger capacity for empathy within that community. I don't know what specifics, right? But I think it would behoove the population if we could approach this with a more human approach than more as it is now, right? Those in total confinement, right? Those that are incarcerated presently are treated nothing more than a number, right? And they the way people communicate within that system towards or about is damaging, right? And it it helps drive what society already believes home to the individual that is in confinement and soon to be released, right? So I mean, well, just something simple. When somebody is engaging with somebody that's formerly incarcerated, refers to them as a convict, right? No, right, I'm not a convict, right? As a person. Um, when they're transporting them, being referred to as a bad guy. Right? I have a bad guy here. One bad guy coming in, right? Can you understand um, how this might damage somebody, right? I mean, and I think it's important to have conversations with the populations that serve those people that are re-entering our community on how to best serve them and turn this into first person language and like start treating um, start treating them as full members of our community. Um, when you separate an other, right, because that's a huge thing. So those that are employed by Department of Corrections and the industries that revolve around it, right? It's unbelievable. In my research, there are so many. We're talking. I mean, one for example is a locksmith. Locksmiths, gardeners, um, caterers, lawyers, judges, um, right, bus drivers. Uh, the list, all points, right, are fueled by the industrial prison complex. And these people need to have some kind of education around those people that are providing them a living, right? So they can become a little bit more empathetic and a little bit more humanized, I think, is key. Because if we deny somebody the right to be seen as a human, we make it very easy to, right, to see them as less than human. That's that's a huge failing within our community, right? Right. That is the root of racism, right? That's the first thing we do as a collective, as a race, as a species, right? As a species, I'll just go that far, is we create this other and we dehumanize. And the thing about formerly incarcerated population is that mm, we're othered by ourselves, right? And we will deny, right, our truth. I mean, I'm not saying that it's any different or anything, but it's what I know, my experience, and we'll run from it like there's no tomorrow. Working with one thing I've learned in the work I do with reentry presently, with directly impacted people of reentering the system, is it's next near impossible to have people advocate for themselves and acknowledge within their identity of being formerly incarcerated. Right? if it's visible, right? Like if it's visible, we could live in it. But if it's invisible, we can escape from it, or try to, or think we can. But it always comes up with a background check. My goal is to educate, form a curriculum around engaging with formerly incarcerated populations. I think that would benefit our community as a whole, um, and create a better, bigger, better good, I guess. Good for all. Thank you very much for listening to me.